So excited about today's episode of This Lyric, That Truth. And I cannot wait to introduce you to my guest today. But I'm going to start out with a powerful lyric of a song that we're playing on the radio right now by Tyrion. Honestly, we just need Jesus. She starts out that song and she goes, I got a front row to the madness. I pick up my phone every morning out of habit. I've been fiending for the drama. I said it. I'm addicted to the rush, need a medic.
I got a front row seat to the madness. I pick up my phone every morning out of habit. I've been fiending for the drama, yeah, I said it. I'm addicted to the rush, need a medic.
We all know what that feels like, that rush, that dopamine hit when we scroll and scroll and scroll and we go, why can't I put this down? Why does this feel like an addiction? And we're kind of addicted to the rush. So I want to introduce you to today's guest who wrote a beautiful book. Her name is Hannah Brencher. And Hannah, your book is called The Unplugged Hours. I have blitzed read it. It is amazing. Introduce
Thank
yourself and tell us a little bit about you and what motivated you to write the book.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. If I've not met you yet, my name is Hannah Brencher, and I am an author and a writer and a online educator. I love teaching people the power of discipline and habits and rhythms that can lead you to live a more intentional life. And I think unplugging definitely falls into that bit. But the Unplugged Hours is, an interesting story because I didn't set out to write a book about unplugging. I didn't actually know it was going to be playing such a prominent role in my own life until about 2021 is when kind of that story started. It was in the midst of COVID, and I was looking around and just feeling really exhausted and tired and so connected, like you were saying, like always picking up my phone, always scrolling, and knowing that the device that I was holding was keeping me from living a fully abundant and present life. And so I made a challenge for myself of unplugging for 1,000 hours in 1 year. And I didn't do that with the hopes of writing a book. I did that with the hopes of my life changing. And it was just crazy the way that God took this story and propelled it in a way that, like, I was like, oh, there is a book to write. And I then viewed it as an act of obedience to be able to write that book. But the power of unplugging is something that I still do every single day. And I recommend it to everybody, even though it's a really uncomfortable thing to talk about. So I'm glad that we're talking about it.
Can you talk to me about if people are interested in starting unplugging more? I read your book over the course of 3 days. I've already unplugged more in those 3 days than I have in years since the
love
pandemic when I discovered
Wow.
TikTok, honestly.
Oh, yeah, that one.
Woo, that one's a tough habit to break. But I am so inspired by it. And I even feel like already doing better, but I am existing in a really uncomfortable tension this week. It is very hard to sit with
Yeah.
yourself just with your own thoughts.
It really is. And that is why, because like when I started unplugging, I wasn't talking to people about it. I wasn't posting about it. I didn't share anything about unplugging for an entire year until I got to the end of that year. Because I realized that was part of like the problem was I was so used to sharing everything with everyone. And then getting my sense of worth and value from what people thought of those things. And so I immersed myself in the unplugging. I went through all the hard feelings on my own. And now that I'm like sharing this message with the world, that is the first thing that I encounter with people. They're like, it's uncomfortable. I don't want to be uncomfortable. Like, I don't like these feelings that are popping up. And I get that completely because even now, thousands of unplugged hours later, it's still uncomfortable. And it's especially uncomfortable if there are things that you may not want to face. If there are things that you're like, oh, this phone has become a coping mechanism for me. Like I could be getting to the root of that anger that I'm feeling. I could be getting to the root of that jealousy or that comparison. But instead, I'm going to scroll and I'm going to tell myself that I'm taking care of myself, that this is a form of self-care. And so there's a lot of layers to unpack with the unplugging, and each person is different. So like what you might uncover about yourself is going to be different than what I uncover about myself. But I know there's so much fullness there. And I know that, like, I honestly believe that this is one of the enemy's tactics to keep us from living that full and abundant life, is to convince us that what we need to pay attention to is happening in our screens, when in actuality, it's happening in real everyday life. But what's the thing about real everyday life is that it is uncomfortable, that it is messy, that it is hard. And we think we can escape that with our phones. And we can, but I think we don't realize often that we are missing out on the reality of life.
That's what you said in your book. I don't want you to miss your life.
Yeah.
When I underlined that, I had to look and ask myself, what am I missing about my life? Because I'm scrolling through other people's lives. And I cannot sit with myself and be bored. I cannot sit and wait for my daughter to be done with soccer practice for 15 minutes without scrolling and filling in the blanks and filling in the boredom. And I don't think I'm alone in that. What's been the feedback to this book?
You're definitely not alone. And it's funny because even though I have like done an extensive amount of unplugging, I don't feel like, because I remember talking with my literary agent about this when we first got into the concept, and she was talking about like how just talking about the idea of unplugging like was causing her to like go home and like turn off her phone for like an hour to be with her girls before like getting into like the evening or whatever. And she said something to me. She was like, I imagine that the more you do it, the easier it gets over time. And I was like, no, actually, no, I don't think it does. Like, I think that these devices are very addictive, and there's new things coming up all the time, right? So originally it was Facebook, and then it moved to Instagram. And Instagram, whereas Facebook was a lot of words, Instagram is a visual platform. Well, then you take Instagram and you move it over to TikTok, and not only is it visual, but it's highly addictive, short segments that our brain just absorbs and absorbs and absorbs, even though we are not wired to take in that much information. And so like, we are in a sense like making ourselves addicted. The devices are making us addicted, and it's impossibly hard to break away from that. And so I would definitely say there is a discomfort of people not wanting to unplug because it feels uncomfortable. And the other thing is that people don't want to unplug because it's this narrative of, I'll miss something. I don't want to miss out on anything. And so I have to stay plugged in. And
I had a moment last night. I was inspired by your book. I was sitting at my son's football game last night, and I was reading the book because the game was really boring. And we all went to Chick-fil-A after the game, and I left my phone in the car, and I just left it sit there. And I'm sitting eating my pimento chicken sandwich, which I highly recommend. And I'm like, what if someone's texting me? What if somebody needs me? What's going on that phone? Now I'm with my husband. I'm with my son.
Yep.
The important people are right there. And I had this anxiety of being separated from that stupid thing. And I get in the car, and my daughter had texted, who had just graduated from cosmetology school, and she wanted the pictures that I took at the celebration. And I was like, oh, I missed that. But you know what would have happened? Had I had my phone at the dinner, I would have been sitting there texting the pictures. She still got the pictures. It was an hour later than she wanted them. She was still able to make her post and celebrate her graduation.
Yeah.
But it is highlighting to me how insane this has all gotten. It's insane.
It is insane. And I think it is like you're hitting on something too. And this is why it's hard to talk about this topic, because I think we have built this idea in 2024 that you need to be accessible 24/7. And if people don't hear from you immediately, they get upset, or they think something's wrong, or they get anxious. And like, that was one of the first things that I had to address with myself, with my friends, with my family. It's like, hey, I will always be available, but that does not equate to accessibility. Like, in order for me to be living and operating in the peace of God, I cannot give you 24/7 accessibility. And that's what I think we miss. Is like, even like with, the life of Jesus, like Jesus was highly available, but he was not always accessible. And that's the difference. And so like, you came back to your phone, you sent the photos, like it was all right there. You hadn't missed anything. You were actually where you needed to be in that moment.
Yeah.
But like, that there's an actual phobia for that. It's called nomophobia. It is the fear of being without one's mobile device. Like a lot of us are dealing with that. But a similar situation like that I experienced when I first started unplugging was like my husband and I wrote about it in the book, but like my husband and I went on a date night, and I had turned off my phone because like our daughter was with her grandma. So it's like in that moment, I know she's completely safe and she will always reach out to her son, And I just was like there in the moment. We had a great night, but I don't know why. But towards the end of the night, I definitely picked a fight, because that's sometimes just what happens on date night, right? And when we were driving home, like in the silence of the car, I remember reaching for my phone, and my phone was off. And it was this moment, like this like fork in the road, just like you had at Chick-fil-A, where it was like, okay, I can either turn on this device and I can drown myself in whatever memes and whatever videos to take away this uncomfortable silence in this car, or I can sit with this feeling and this discomfort, and it will not swallow me. It will not become me. I will be able to move through it. And like in that moment, I did not turn on my phone. And I remember just like sitting in the silence of the car and being like, okay, yeah, like I'm determined to feel my life. And I think like you hit it, like it's these little decisions that we start to make of like, will I be present right where I'm at, even if it's as mundane as eating a Chick-fil-A sandwich? Or will I keep living by the excuse of somebody's going to need me and I am always going to be accessible to them?
Hannah, I don't know how old you are, but I'm approaching kind of like a halfway through life mark. That's the way that I put it. I remember a childhood without phones. I
Yeah.
remember getting my first phone when I was in my 20s. I remember going and hanging out at friends' houses and calling on a landline.
Mm-hmm.
People were not at all like you didn't live in a constant fear that someone needs to get a hold of you at any time.
Yeah.
And now we just I think you've really hit on what is causing so much anxiety. We are
Mm.
not sitting through our uncomfortable feelings. We're placating them with scrolling so I don't have to feel uncomfortable ever. And yet really it's causing more uncomfortability and more dissatisfaction and
Mm-hmm.
more anxiety. And yet we can't get away from it. And I think that's what you're inviting people to do in this book. It isn't like throw the phone in the garbage can. They can be helpful. They can be useful. I was glad I had my phone at my daughter's graduation to take the pictures and the video,
Totally. Yeah.
but I don't need to live with that thing in my back pocket or in my purse at all times.
Yeah. It's so true. And it's a hard battle, because I wanted to know if there was a way to strike a balance, And so it's like, for me, I grew up, I have very clear, vivid memories of the landline phones, of like, you thought a boy was cute and you waited by the landline at night for them to call,
It was the
and then,
best.
yeah, like I think I got my first phone when I was 15, because that was like right when everything was like the Nokias and all that stuff. But even then, it was like texting. That's all you could do on a phone. It wasn't a pocket computer. And there were absolutely no portals to all these other worlds and all these other lives. And I'm like, okay, if me, like a woman in her 30s, struggles with comparison because I'm on these apps, like, what does that look like for somebody in their 20s? What does that look like for somebody in their teen years? And so it's like not facing all the emotions, but then having all these other emotions that probably would not have existed had we not opened up these apps, right? Like back then it was like you compared yourself to like the popular girl in high school, not the popular girl at the high school 2,000 miles away who's got a TikTok account. And so,
and is a millionaire because she's become a millionaire as an influencer at 18.
Yeah. And that's, it's going to be really interesting to see how the next like 10 to 15 years unfold. Because even now, like with people wanting to build platforms and wanting to be influencers, the trade-off is the presence in your own life. Like,
You said something so fascinating in your book. You said that something has shifted in our culture and we are doing less secret work.
mm-hmm.
As a broadcaster, somebody who, broadcasts everything, and I think I relate to you a little bit in your book too, because you're a TED speaker and online and you got the blue check mark and all the things. And you were really convicted at one point in your life that nothing was secret
Yeah.
and you were sharing everything. I understand that. And we're doing so much less secret work. Everything is for public consumption and
Yeah.
everything is done with a thought. How is this going to translate online?
Well, not that therein lies the problem too, I think, because like the secret work and the secret places, and I was getting to a place in my faith where I was like, oh, like my faith is basically commodified at this point, right? Like I'm sitting with my Bible and being like, God, what can I share today? Oh, that's a good nugget. I'll share that. Ooh, that'll work as a graphic. And that's just like not what my faith set out to be. Like there's a line in the book about how like my faith has returned to what it was always intended to be, which was a lifeline. But I will say, like, to get into these secret places, like to get into these places that I think a lot of like the greats and great theologians hundreds of years ago have written about, like you have to be able to go like deeper and deeper into the stillness. And that I will say, it gets easier with time. The more that you are willing to sit undistracted, the more that you're willing to do the quote unquote secret work, the more you're willing to say, okay, like this is a feeling that popped up, and in my quiet time, I'm going to bring this to God and I'm going to sit and I'm going to listen for what he might say about that. Like that was not something that I set out to, like that wasn't something I thought the Unplugged Hours was going to give me, but like I can sit here today and be like, wow, like my faith feels so completely different because I took it back as my own. And I think that that's like the danger of the world and the culture, the Christian culture that we're living in today. It's like we are all talking about it, but like, are we actually walking it out? Like, what do your secret places look like? Or do your secret places exist so that you can give them to other people, when in actuality, we all just need to get off the phone and cultivate our own secret places, like, and then live from that place. And so, yeah, like, whereas I used to be like really obsessed with like, what am I going to post and how is that going to do? And like, how can I show people God, which I think is still important to show people God. When I sit in the silence and the stillness and I listen for what God wants me to do, those things are always completely different than what I want to do. It's always like the things that I should do for my family or for my friends, or the things that I'll never be able to document or share because it's actually not the point. And so it's hard and it's uncomfortable, but at the same time, like, man, like the fullness that comes from like following Jesus just because you want to follow him wholeheartedly, not because you want to package him up and give him to other people, like, has changed my life.
Do you feel like anything in your professional life has suffered in
No, it's
cultivating a secret?
grown.
Right,
It's
right,
grown.
right.
And
Because can I be honest with you, Hannah? That's my fear. I
yeah,
consume so much, even Christian content.
yeah,
Even TikTok, right, for radio, it gives me the best clips because they're 60 seconds or less. They're succinct. They are like
yep,
the best. Like if I was listening to your TED talk and somebody put it on TikTok, it's the best 60 seconds of the whole talk. I take that, I email it to myself, I extract that audio, I put it on my radio show, spiritual content. Boom, here we are.
yeah,
And I'm like, if I don't have that, what am I going to have? But as I'm reading your book and really experiencing a sense of conviction about it, um, is it my spiritual life I'm sharing or is it everybody else's, for those
yeah.
bite-sized nuggets that people can consume?
Well, and it's interesting too, because it's like I've led a lot of friends through this because like I'm
Mm.
still very much on social media. I just have
Yeah.
different boundaries around it.
Yeah.
And I reached a point, especially with social media, where it was like in the midst of like, want to say it was like hour 200, 300 that I looked at social media and I was like, this is not fun anymore. This isn't fun. This feels like a rat race. This isn't why I got on these platforms. And I became determined of like, I am going to step back. I'm going to change this. I'm going to figure out what's wrong. And if I can't figure out what's wrong, I'm getting offline. And what I realized in that was that I was not giving myself space to actually create anything on my own. Like, because creativity in its own would be like you sitting with a notepad in the stillness and saying, God, what do you want me to do for this show? God, who are the guests that you have for me? God, what are the themes and the topics that you want me to get into? And his ideas are always going to be far better than ours. But when we don't listen to him and when we go and look at what everybody else is doing, everybody else is leading us to destinations that are not our destination. So like we will get somewhere, but it's not necessarily where God wanted us to go, right? And
so good. That's
I think
so
for
good.
me, like you can see the evidence of it in the Unplugged Hours. I am so proud of this book. I love this book so much, but I think that the reason I love this book so much is because this book, to me, I get like emotional talking about it, but this book reminds me of the first book that I wrote. And the first book that I wrote, like, even though I was like young in my 20s, I had a highly creative process. And then what happened over time, I started consuming more. I started watching more. I started becoming obsessed with this idea that as a Christian influencer, I had to have all the answers. And so everything that I started to write was about solving all these problems all over the place. And then when I started to unplug and get away from the noise, I realized this isn't me. This is not me. Like my faith has so much more mystery to it. I don't have all the answers and I'm okay with that. I just want to be a storyteller. I just want to point people to the goodness of God. And so in writing this book completely unplugged, I feel like I got back to the person that always wanted to be a writer to begin with. I didn't necessarily want to solve everybody's problems and have all the answers. I just wanted to be a writer who writes beautiful words and makes people feel less alone. And so, yeah, like I think I was losing that without even realizing I was losing it.
I'm wondering if that is a question that everybody listening to this podcast could ask themselves. What did you start out to be or to do? And it can be a mom. It can be being a great mom. It can be being a great teacher. It can be anything. It doesn't have to be career oriented or something super special. And
Yeah.
what part of that has gotten lost along the way? And what part of that has your phone and your social media played in it? Of course, you know, I'm here totally acknowledging I definitely need, and I want to go back through your book a lot slower too. I consumed it pretty quickly because I knew we were chatting today, but there's so many nuggets in it and I don't want to miss them.
Yeah.
And so just kind of just sitting and asking yourself and then taking that notebook you were talking about, God, what do you want to say to me about this? What do you want to show me through this? Where do you want me to go from here?
Yeah, like there was an instance that happened like 2 months ago where I like to do batch work. So like if I have like emails to send out, I like to do like them all in one batch rather than like every week. And so I set a goal for myself a few months ago that I wanted to write all of the content for this email I send out every Monday called the Monday Club. And it's like encouraging words, like faith-filled words, but I wanted to come up with all the concepts and write all the emails in 1 month through the end of the year. And there was one day that I had designated to like planning and starting to write, but I was so distracted. I was, oh, well, I'll just do this on my email and then I'll just do this and then I'll get to it. But then, oh, wait, this needs to be, yep. And as long as I was connected and not focused, I was frazzled. I was all over the place. And I got to the end of the day and I was like, you know what? Okay, it's Friday. This day is a wash. I'm going to turn off the phone, made a cup of tea, grabbed a yellow notepad, and my daughter was like playing like on the floor in front of me. And in that next 90 minutes, I did more than I had done that whole week. It was like oh, you're finally listening. Here's the download. Here's the topics. Here's the framework. Like all of it came out once I was willing to put away the distraction. And so that's what I mean about like, no, like my work has only grown. My audience has only become richer. Like my focus has only become more refined, because if we want to run our own race, we can't just be sitting on the sidelines watching everybody else run their race. Like that doesn't work.
That is
Sorry, I get so passionate.
Well, as you have led your friends, you were saying you've led some friends through this, through the uncomfortable starting of this. And so you know their stories and you know their feedback. What would people be surprised to know about living an unplugged life or more unplugged life?
So I think that the conversation that we're having around our phones right now is like when we get in our social circles, it's like, oh, I know the phone's bad. I know I want to put the phone away. You know, oh, I know it's such a time suck. And it can be a very negative conversation. In the same time that like whenever I would go and like look up screen time on my iPhone, I don't know if you've ever looked up screen time, but it only ever made me feel like deep shame, like not good. Just like, even if I was doing good that week, I still felt like, ugh. And we do this with other areas of our life, right? Like we want to lose weight. We immediately are like, what am I taking away from myself? What am I depriving myself of? And what I realized in this was that by adding in what I call these unplugged hours, like, it was no longer about what you can't have. It was about what you can have. And so I've been very deliberate in being like, okay, if my phone is away at this time, this is what I'm engaging in, whether that is my quiet time, whether that is my writing time, whether that is time with my daughter, or like going around the block and like going for a walk without my phone. And so I would challenge people to say, okay, instead of what am I taking away, what do I want to add in? Because then when you start adding in that presence in daily life, what actually ends up happening, I think, or in my own experience, is that the phone becomes less addicting because you have other things that you can see the results of that had nothing to do with the phone. And that's what it's like. I'm very careful to just be like, hey, like, I don't think the phones are bad. I love social media. I love being able to, in 2024, reach people and communicate with people in this way. That's such a beautiful gift. But by taking time away from it to do other things, I come back into this space and it means more. Because if you had asked me 3 years ago, I would have told you that my life was online. And now I can go online and say, my life is not here anymore. I can show up here, but then I go back to my life.
You're sort of filling up a well within yourself with God and with this creativity. And so the outflow is from a deep well instead of the outflow being from everything else you've collected from what everybody else is doing.
That's the most accurate way to say it. It's like, yes, like I'm operating now from a place of overflow rather than the overwhelm that comes from just clicking here, clicking there, you know, like whether or not we realize it, it's like, no, just that like switching from app to app to app to thing to thing to thing is making us scattered. It's making us fatigued. It's slowing us down.
I don't watch TV anymore. I don't watch movies anymore. I don't. The TV's never on, but because I'm on my phone, that's my entertainment. And I'm like, oh, that's fine. That's just the way that I used to relax. It's fine. I've just replaced it with this. But then I've noticed this interesting thing, this creeping, I would call it low level depression, anxiety. I'm not doing enough. I'm not quite enough. My house isn't quite enough and really where it should be. Everything is just a little bit off. But I don't know why. Objectively, everything is great, but internally, it's a new kind of unrest. And as I read your book, I thought it is from this.
It is.
It's not just from the phone. It's from the time. It's from the time on the phone. It's from the dopamine hits with the TikTok and all of that. And
and your algorithm knows what you're looking at. It knows what you want. It knows what you're trying to
Mm.
improve or where you're trying to grow. And so, yeah, it's no wonder that you consume stuff and then you're like, I don't feel like I'm enough. I don't feel like I'm doing enough. I don't feel like I'm showing up in that way. And like, that's where I'm almost like, now I like can watch TV shows and enjoy them because like, oh, they're not in any way trying to make me a better individual or a more productive individual. It's just, oh, I like the plot line of this show and I think I'll follow it. And I think that that's what's really hard about social media is that it is human lives that we are digesting and consuming. And there's no way we're not comparing ourselves to these people, even in subtle ways. Even if you're like, this is a comfort creator and I love them, but I need their shoes. I need their shoes. And now I have to go spend $100 on Amazon for shoes that earlier today were nowhere in my mind.
Okay, you talked about a cast iron pan in your book.
Yeah.
Is it the Staub, Staub one? Or is it a different brand? Because
No,
I got
it's Our Place. Our Place.
oh, Our Place. I got
Which
influenced
is a
to
great, it's a great pan. I
was it
literally
that
just
one
bought it.
the one pan that does everything, it steams, it's got the
Yep, the
bath?
Always pan. The Always
Always
pan.
pan.
Literally just bought it as a wedding gift yesterday. Because I'm like, it is a great pan, but like, this is
Yeah.
not going to fix the junk inside of me.
No, not at all. Not at
It's
all.
so funny.
You have a really great, and we're going to link to it in our show notes of the podcast. You have it's kind of, well, it's in your book. It's a bunch of bubbles that represent the 1,000
Mhm.
hours. You probably have it on your website too, right? If people wanted to go
Yep.
there to print it out. And just kind of the challenge is spend 1,000 unplugged hours in a year, right?
Yep. That's the challenge. And it's inside of the book. So while you are reading, you can be tracking your unplugged hours, but it also is available as a free tracker online. But I honestly would say, like, now that I've like done it and I'm on the other side of like a lot of unplugged hours, I'd say, yeah, like the goal might be 1,000 hours in a year, but also if you don't accomplish that, it's totally okay because every single bubble that you do cross off, every single hour that you do unplug, that's a piece of your time that you have claimed back. And that is just as valuable and just as important. And so it's funny because the girl that started out with the goal of 1,000 hours unplugged in 1 year was also very hyper focused on, achieving goals and like hitting bench stones and milestones. And like I always say, like I've never met like a 30-day challenge that I didn't love. And it's funny how that has started to really change in my spirit. Like I still love those challenges, but I feel like I hear the Lord speaking more when I go to do one of those things of like, why? What's the motive here? Like, why do we need to do this? Why can't this just become an everyday habit? And I'm like, I don't know. I'm wired to achieve things. And that's one of the things that has started to fall off of me through unplugging. It's like, oh, I don't have to do everything just to tell people I did something. Like it's enough just to be in the flow of everyday life.
It's enough just to be in the flow of everyday life. Hannah, I am so thankful for your book.
Thank you.
I am so thankful that you were inspired by God to start practicing unplugging and then that He gave you the inspiration to write the book. You are going to help me and you're going to help so many people with this content. I was thinking as we were talking, people that struggle with alcoholism or that are drug addicts, you go through that detox, it's uncomfortable and it's hard, but then you can go to a group and get support, and you can live in that because it's uncomfortable for the rest of your life. If you've ever had any kind of addiction, it never fully goes away, but it becomes easier in some ways. You see the world in a new way in some ways. Where could people go to get support of living an unplugged life?
That is a great question.
I mean, is it a group of friends? Do you do you reach out to a group of friends and just like hold me accountable on this?
I'm like, we do need like an AA for our
I know.
phones for sure.
I nominate you president.
I'll be starting. No, yeah, I would say start with your friends. And it doesn't have to be a big group of them. It doesn't have to be, like one or two friends that you're like, hey, I want to be more present. Like, start with your spouse. Like, and I think the important thing is that it's not about getting everybody on board with what you are doing. It's just about letting people know this is something that's important to me. And so I want to try it, because like it can be a very different experience. Like if I were like, people always ask like, oh, so do you and your husband both unplug? And I'm like, no, like he has done the trackers and he has done his own journey of unplugging, but like I'm not forcing that on him, you know? And I think that like by you just like showing up and deciding that you're going to do this and you're going to like loop some friends in, like your own, like let your walk be your example.
I've already made a mistake because I made a big announcement to my family. My 15-year-old, I was like, we're going to be unplugging. And she ran away.
No, yeah, but like I think that's the thing is like, and you know, my daughter's very little. She's 4 years old. So I can't just be like, now we are an unplugged family. No more screen time. But like what I can do is show up and cultivate presence and not make a big stink about it and do my quiet time at the table and be with her without my phone and let my example live, rather than everybody, we all have to do this now. Like
right.
yeah.
Do you want to hear something funny? I took a picture of myself reading your book on the front porch, and I was going to post it on social media, and I will, because I want to invite people to read it. I want to promote your book, but I was like, it's a little bit of the what's the word I'm looking for? It's a little bit opposite of really the motivation, right? It's to show everybody, look at I'm plugging while I'm on my phone and posting it on social media. So
it's the irony of it all, right?
It's ironic, exactly.
Yeah, it's been interesting to market a book about unplugging while being very plugged in. You're like, great, we have to market this book on social media.
Okay, Hannah, but this is what I really like about you, and I'm so impressed by. It's not extreme. You are not going and going extreme and everybody's getting rid of their phones forever. It's like, yep, we live in modern technology. I wouldn't be able to navigate myself out of a paper bag without the GPS on my phone. I really wouldn't. I need it. I take several work trips. I need to FaceTime my kids and my family, and I need to see them through the screen. There's so many positive things about it. You're not saying that there aren't. You're just saying that we need to really reflect and really think about what we're stuffing down in our own emotional lives by scrolling, or what excuses we're making by scrolling. And you're asking us to live a more present life with ourselves, with our faith, with our families, and with our friends.
Yes. Amen.
And so it's not extreme. Anybody can do this. I love your tip. When you're, and I'm going to employ this in my own life, you have a small tin box and you put your phone in it for 2 hours at a time. And that's your work time, right?
Yeah. I mean, just 1 hour at a time forever. You know, for me, I'm like, if it's going to be creative, like I have like a set goal in mind of like, oh, well, like it's that time before dinner where I want to be like with my daughter and cleaning up the house and everything. I don't need to be scrolling on TikTok. Like I'll just put the phone in the box. And then when I complete whatever it is that I set out to complete, I can take the phone out. But I think what's really important about that, whether it's a box or it's a Tupperware or it's an envelope or another room, having something where you can evidently see the transition, right? Where it's like, okay, I'm putting my phone into this box. And then when I go to take my phone out of this box, I am aware that I am stepping out of this zone and back into this zone.
I love that. It's such a great tip. Our producer, Abby, who was the one who introduced me to you and your book, she even told me off the air she loves that Monday email that you send. She said that what she started to do is print off pictures of her daughters and put them in photo albums because of a suggestion from your book.
Yes,
and she's like, I ask myself, is this picture just meant to live forever in my phone, or is it something I want to print out and look at? And then she said her daughter's flipping through the pages.
They love it, right?
Yeah.
Yep. It's crazy. Like my daughter, like she always goes through our photo albums, and I'm like, that's beautiful because it's how I grew up, always going through photo albums. But like, that's just a little way that we can set the tone a little bit differently for our kids and for ourselves, like to make things a little bit more tangible within a world that is just all digital.
Mm-hmm. I loved the book. It's a Zondervan book, so you can get this at any Christian bookstore and online. And we'll, of course, link your social media on our show notes so people can find you. Is there anything you want to leave us with? Any bit of advice or encouragement?
I feel like we've covered a lot of ground in this interview, but yeah, I just want to let people know, like, hey, like, it's okay that it's going to be uncomfortable, but I promise you, like, there's something waiting for you in the Unplugged Hours. And I can't tell you what it is because it's going to be different for you than it is for me. But like, man, do I want you to experience it.
There's something waiting for you in the Unplugged Hours. Hannah, it was a joy speaking with you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to today's episode of This Lyric, That Truth. If you were inspired by today's conversation, feel free to share it with a friend and leave a 5-star review. If you're looking for more hope and encouragement in your music, download the Joy Media mobile app for free wherever you download your apps. I'm Cece, and I so look forward to sharing more in-depth conversations with you as we talk about the lyrics that encourage us and shape our lives. Meet me back here next week for another episode of This Lyric, That Truth.